So, how does a country sitting on the largest oil reserves in the entire world go from being a close U.S. partner to an adversary threatened with military action? Well, that's the story of the United States and Venezuela. It's a relationship built on black gold and then completely fractured by revolution. Let's get into it.
All right, to really get a handle on just how broken this relationship is, we have to start right at the edge. Let's rewind to a moment when all the usual diplomatic talk just went out the window, and something pretty much unthinkable was put on the table.
So, back in August 2017, President Donald Trump says this, and you could practically hear the entire diplomatic world just hold its breath. This wasn't just some off-the-cuff tough talk. It was an unprecedented threat, as one analysis put it, that pushed the already crumbling U.S.-Venezuela relationship right to the absolute brink. Which, of course, begs the big question. How did it come to this? I mean, really, how did we get here? These two nations were once tight partners. What on earth happened to turn all that cooperation into this level of confrontation? That's the journey we're about to take.
Well, for most of the 20th century, the answer was actually pretty simple, and it flowed right from the ground. You just can't understand the partnership or the fallout without understanding the one thing that fueled it all: oil. This story is as much about energy as it is about politics.
Wow, just look at that number. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on the entire planet. To put that in perspective, that's more than Saudi Arabia. Let that sink in. This incredible natural wealth has been the defining feature of its modern history. It's been both a blessing and, honestly, a curse that tied its fate directly to the world's biggest energy consumer, the United States. But here's the catch. Venezuelan oil is mostly what's called heavy crude. It's super thick, dense, and frankly, a real pain to refine. Getting it out of the ground and turning it into something useful like gasoline takes specialized technology and a ton of investment. And for decades, guess who was the primary partner providing all that know-how and cash? Yep, the United States. So for a long, long time, this whole arrangement just worked. It was symbiotic. U.S. companies brought the money and the tech. Venezuela supplied a steady, reliable flow of oil. Even when Venezuela decided to nationalize its industry back in '76, creating the state-owned giant PDVSA, that basic deal with the U.S. market, it stayed intact. It was a stable alliance built entirely on a shared interest in oil. But then, at the turn of the century, everything, and I mean everything, changed. The election of a former paratrooper named Hugo Chávez set off a political earthquake that would completely redraw the map of U.S.-Venezuela relations. Under Chávez, it's like the entire dynamic did a 180. The relationship went from this pragmatic partnership, focused on oil and business, to this full-blown ideological fight. All of a sudden, the United States wasn't a partner anymore. It was the imperialist enemy in Chávez's new socialist vision for the country. And Chávez didn't just make speeches. He took action. He constantly accused the U.S. of plotting against him, especially during a coup attempt in 2002. He gave that now famous smells of sulfur speech at the United Nations, calling President Bush the devil. He kicked out the American ambassador and cut off decades of military cooperation. So you get the picture, right? This wasn't just a cooling of relations. It was a total, deliberate reversal. Okay, so after Chávez dies in 2013, his hand-picked successor, Nicolás Maduro, doesn't just continue the policy, he doubles down on the confrontation. And that's when the U.S. really started leaning on a new tool in its foreign policy toolbox: sanctions. But, as we'll see, not everyone used that tool the same way. Now, on paper, the official goal from the U.S. side stayed pretty consistent across different presidents: to pressure the Venezuelan government to restore democracy and human rights. The goal didn't change, but the playbook on how to get there was about to get a major, major rewrite. Think of the Obama administration's approach like using a scalpel. It was all about being surgical and diplomatic. They used targeted sanctions aimed at specific government officials accused of corruption or human rights abuses, trying to put pressure on the people in charge without, hurting the entire country. At the same time, they were busy building a coalition with other Latin American nations to create unified regional pressure. But here's the thing. That scalpel approach, it didn't get the results they wanted. So when the Trump administration came in, they swapped the scalpel for a sledgehammer. This was the era of maximum pressure. They slapped these crippling sanctions on the entire state oil company, PDVSA, basically turning off the government's main cash pipeline. And then came the moves that really shocked people. recognizing an opposition leader as the real president and indicting Maduro as a narco-terrorist. And that leads us to this really key takeaway, summed up perfectly in this 2018 report. It said, U.S. actions have had an effect, but have not been effective. What does that mean? Well, they absolutely wrecked the Venezuelan economy. That's the effect. But were they effective in their main goal of removing Maduro from power? Nope. He held on. Okay, so if the big political goal wasn't met, what was the real-world impact of all this escalating pressure? This is where the story gets really tough, because we have to look at the consequences for Venezuela's economy, and most importantly, for its people. I mean, just look at this. The numbers on this chart are absolutely staggering. From the start of the Chávez era, and then speeding up like crazy under Maduro and U.S. sanctions, Venezuela's oil production just cratered. We're talking about an almost 80% drop. It's like the engine of the entire country just died. And when the economy collapses like that, it's not just numbers on a chart. It becomes a full-blown humanitarian catastrophe. Remember how oil money paid for everything from healthcare to food subsidies? Well, when that money vanished, the country couldn't afford to import basic necessities anymore, and that led to crippling shortages of food and medicine and a refugee crisis that has seen millions of people literally flee for their lives. So that brings us pretty much up to today. The Biden administration has kind of shifted gears again. They're trying to use sanctions not just as a stick, but as a carrot, too. The idea is to offer some sanctions relief in exchange for getting the Maduro government and the opposition to sit down and actually negotiate a political solution. It's a clear pivot away from maximum pressure and back toward diplomacy. So here we are. After 100 years of partnership built on oil, a political revolution, and years of intense economic warfare, we're left with a broken relationship, a country deep in crisis, and a policy playbook that is squeezed but hasn't succeeded. It leaves us with this huge, difficult question. In a standoff where millions of lives are hanging in the balance, what does a path forward even look like?